Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the meeting of the Glendale Water and Power Commission for Monday, December 3rd, 2012. May we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Jimian? Commissioner Chan?
Present.
President Armenian?
He's running a few minutes late, so we're going to get started without him. I'm sure he'll come in momentarily.
Okay. Commissioner Detler?
Present.
Commissioner Yell?
Present.
We have a short agenda today. We'll start with item 2, consent items, and that is approval of our November 5th, 2012 meeting minutes. I'll be abstaining because I was not present.
I will be abstaining as well.
I would suggest that we defer this item then because we don't have a quorum to even vote on it.
Approve it, so we'll see if we get a quorum for that later in the agenda. Thank you. Moving to item 3 then.
3A, GWP Utility Modernization Update.
Members of the Commission, I'm going to ask Mr. Keenan and Mr. Frega, Mr. Frega, our Information Services Director, to go over some IS issues that we will be taking to Council tomorrow, but we wanted to brief you on those and show you those specific issues that are pertinent to GWP. We have talked to you in the past about some of the cybersecurity issues we had, and there's one small piece of that here. And I think I'd also mentioned to you that we had done some internal reorganizing of our budget in order to try to keep some level of momentum going on our smart meter, smart grid project. So that's included here as well. And we hope to be able to get our billing system up and running shortly after the first of the year, and this is some of the foundation needed to get that done as well. So with that, let me have Mr. Keenan start off and go over this with you.
Commissioners, Greg Keenan, Business Transformation and Marketing Administrator. I'm going to go over the budget, talk a little bit about what we're doing this year, give them maybe a little overview of what we hope to do next year, and then Ed will come in and talk to the IS issues. This works? So in terms of the budget, this is in thousands. That's was our projection. It was going to be the $51.3 million. This is the DOE only project by March of 2013. As of September of this year, we've spent $44.1 million. With our projection is out to now March of 2014 because we got the year extension. So we're still at the 51.3 as our obligation. So at the end of this year, well, I'll get into that on the next slide. Let me finish this up. After the grants, September 20 this year, net cost to us right now is about 23.8. We've received just over $20 million in grants, and then total net to us at the end of the project is about 30.3. This year, we did have our DOE site visit. We had 4 members of DOE come out on October 25th. They were here the whole day. We gave them a presentation of where we're at in the project, what we've done, gave them a tour of some of the facilities, and that meeting went really well. So we're really pleased with that. We're going to have to update our project execution plan, though, because we did add that extra year. The next slide I'll cover the things we're going to be adding into that. Did you have a question, Commissioner?
No, not yet.
Okay. So what Mr. Zern just mentioned, we have this Go Live project. We're looking to do 100% of our billing off this system by January of 2013. We have a project where we're looking to mitigate meters that's been going on for about a month and a half, 2 months now. That number, the 226 is just the electric meters. There's actually 120 water meters where we need to visit. But still, that's 346 meters out of 120,000. That's a very low number.
What do those consist of? What's the range of problems when
the 120 water meters are in basements, in garages, and we're having trouble getting the signal out. That number was 160 last week. We put in a new cell, a collection unit in that area, and it picked up 40 of those meters. So just adding the one collection unit reduced it from 160 to 120. We have another 8 collection units to put out in the city. So we're pretty confident we'll be able to get that number way down here in the next few weeks.
So that's 120 water meters, and what's the other?
The electric meters, there's a combination, there's about 95 that have never read, and some of those issues are they don't have the security keys in there, so we can't communicate with them. We have to go out and inject the keys. I believe there's 39 of those. There's another 56 or so. We just have to go out and interrogate the meter and either replace it or add some firmware to it. There's another, that number includes 132 that haven't read in the last 5 days. And that could be various issues. You know, that number goes up and down. But we think there's probably 12 to 20 of those we'll have to go out and visit.
You know, one reason I asked, I don't want to interrupt the flow of your
Sure.
presentation, but from time to time I hear little snippets pop up on the internet about, how can I put this, about intentional vandalism by people who really didn't want the meters in the first place. Do we have any problem
I have
with that
not heard
magnitude?
of one incident.
Great. Thanks.
That 120,000, right next to the 226, is that including only electric meters or including
Yeah,
water
that's
as well?
electric and
Only
water.
electric and water.
Yes.
Okay.
And that's a round number. I think it's
Okay.
a little less than that. But we've been installing additional Tropos radios. That's the wide area network. Also additional cell relays and collection units. I mentioned the one collection unit for water that we put in that really had a big effect on our system. We put in 5 new Tropos radios and 15 cell relays in the past 6 weeks, and that's really helped the system. You wanted details on exactly how that, you know, we had probably 10 cell relays that were at about 80% of their load. We like it to be more like 70 or 60. So we've been able to reduce that number that had that. I think there's one now that's 80%. Also, we have to reconfigure our storage area network to add additional storage. And we want to do there's an upgrade to the MDMS, the meter data management system, before we go live. I should mention, and Tammy's here, she can verify this. I believe we are billing about 25% of our routes right now. So the system does work as we expected. We're also doing a fiber extension to Montrose as part of the distribution automation pilot. Right now we don't have fiber that goes all the way to the north end of the city, but we do have a project to have that done in the next 3 to 4 months.
Can I stop you
Sure.
once more? Sorry. So our goal is to have 100% of our billing done by January. We're in December, and we have only a quarter of our billing being done right now. And you think it's realistic to get to 100% in a month or 2 months? Am I hearing that right?
That's what
That's the goal.
Yeah, that's the goal. Yeah, I would think so. We could increase the number now. It's just,
Oh,
you know, the IT people, and Ed can talk to this when he comes up, you know, will feel more comfortable going to 100% because then the meter readers are going to start to go away. There's what? You have 2 now? They have 2 full-time right now, so sorry about that. So did that answer your question then?
kind of.
Kind of?
I mean, it just is a big gap, 75%, to make up to close that gap by January. So, but it sounds like you're comfortable that you're going to get there.
Yes.
Yeah, it's just the final aspects of the system that we need to put in place. And before we picked that date, I sat with everybody to make sure they were comfortable about that, because we don't want to pick a date that we aren't comfortable with. As Craig said, we could add more now, but the sense is let's get it all worked out, ready to go. We've seen how 25% works. That gives Tammy and her crew some experience in dealing with it.
I see, thank you. That's the assurance I was wondering. We really don't want the public, having us miss deadlines, and so we should set ones that are feasible and reachable, and so, but you're comfortable that that's a reachable deadline, so thanks.
The next, we're in the phase 2 of our in-home display pilot. I believe we have about 40 of these in-home displays out in the field now. We have another 30 to 40 we're going to be putting out there in the next month. People are really liking these devices, and they're happy to have them, and we really expect good things from this.
I have a question regarding those. So what's the process you're following to gather feedback from the pilot? And the reason I ask is I'm on the pilot, and
Right.
I've offered my opinions, but I've never been solicited.
I don't have the details here, but I believe there's going to be focus groups and things like that in the next few months.
Okay.
I could have someone come in and give you more details on that whole process, but it's pretty detailed way they're going to look at the results and gauge people's
So they're going to, or they have?
They're going to.
Okay.
Once they get the 70 out there, they'll be out there for a couple months, and then they'll go do these focus groups and surveys and that thing.
Okay. Thank you.
And then we started the budget planning for next year. So what are we looking at next year? It all depends on, things outside of our control, but, we're going to assume that we get these things in the budget for now. To complete the pilot, or the DOE project, we're looking at $4.8 to $5 million, and that's just the electric portion of it. That would be to complete the distribution automation pilot, to put in the distribution management, outage management system, to purchase and start to install the business intelligence tools in the data warehouse. We're looking at a software to look at energy and water diversion. We have some upgrades to the Harris North Star to provide for single sign-on and customer data, or access to water data and other benefits. There's the IVR, the voice recognition system that needs to be upgraded. And then these last three are security-related items that I believe were discussed at the last meeting. So that's just my part of the update. If you have questions or...
Earlier, you mentioned, or you reminded us that we're extending a year
Yes.
this project, and that's with the money from DOE.
Yes.
Okay, and how is this? How does this reflect that?
Well, our obligation to DOE is $51.3 million that we need to spend on the project by now March 2014. We will have some things we put in this year. This would be in the fiscal year 2013-14 budget. We would need to have around $4.8 to $5 million in that electric budget for the DOE project to meet our $51 million.
Okay, so this has to move forward then for 2013 to 14, the $4 to $5 million.
To meet that obligation,
To make that
yes.
obligation?
Yes.
Okay.
So essentially what we did with the extension was we zeroed the budget out this year. So what we deferred this year, then we asked for our extension ostensibly and hopefully to get that taken care of just 1 year in the future.
Okay, great. Before we move on, I want to commend you and your team with this project. I attended a conference, APPA conference, as you all know, American Public Power Association, and I was talking to this one small utility, and before I even related the information that I'm sitting on the Glendale Water and Power Board, this individual asked me, where do you live? I mentioned Glendale, and she said, oh, I've been studying the Glendale model on smart meter. So, thank you so much for putting us on the map, and congratulations on the success.
Well, thank you. I'll let our team know that.
Okay.
And so the next would be Ed Braga would come up and...
As Ed's coming up, I thought I'd mention as well the January go live. Mr. Frege has announced his retirement, so we want to make sure he finishes that before he goes. He cannot get out without finishing that.
Thank you, Steve. President Armenian and members of the Commission, Ed Frega, Information Services Director. We have a number of items that will be going to Council tomorrow. It's not coincidental that there's like 6 items on that meeting because, as you know, Council is going to be in recess for about a month, so we want to be sure to get all these items taken care of. Of those items, and these are the items that are going to Council tomorrow, of those items there are some that are GWP related, so I will just go to those and tell you a little bit about each of those. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. On consent, we have the second item there, the maintenance for EMC SAN and backup system for $122,000. That EMC is a corporation. We have their storage area network, which is a data storage mechanism for modern systems. We're doing this throughout the city. The reason that that's related to GWP is that a good portion of the data on that system is GWP data. Most of it is AMI data. Some of it was set aside for water SCADA originally. The backup is an enterprise system backup that is also from EMC, that when I say enterprise, it's being used actually now for not only GWP, which was what we acquired for originally, but we've expanded it considerably for all of the larger enterprise applications of the city. So our entire PeopleSoft HR, payroll, finance system, our Exchange, our email system, our document management, FileNet system, and others are now being backed up through this system. And that's replicated over to the city of Burbank as well. What this item is simply continued maintenance on those systems. We have to keep them under maintenance so that we can get all the support we need. And this continues that support through this into the end of this fiscal year so that we can begin to start that renewal to match our fiscal year. So that's what the $122,000, and it's actually not coming out of GWP's accounts. It's coming out of ISD, and then we allocate our costs back. On the action items, the first one there is for the 24/7 operational support, and this is something that I think should be understood. It's the $566,000. That is also for a continuation of support we've already been getting for 2 years, and it goes from November 1, frankly, through June 30th, 2013. Again, realigning it with the fiscal boundary of the city. What that operational support is in effect for AMI, the day-to-day specialized IT services for 24/7 support for the AMI system is been effectively outsourced. We acquired a vendor who would and does already do 24/7, which can get very expensive, on an ongoing basis for other people to do that for the AMI system as well. And the agenda statement shows a number of services. It's not just monitoring, they're doing database management. These AMI systems professionals in the field looking at these Oracle databases have noted to me that these systems are highly volatile. There's a lot of data movement in them, and they require a lot of attention. So there's database management, there's security monitoring, there's event monitoring, there's patch management, operating system maintenance, all of those for the AMI servers, of which there are quite a few. There are a set of servers here in the city of Glendale and another set in the city of Burbank. So that's what the $566,000 is, to continue that on through the end of the fiscal year. And then the 39 servers are actually being funded out of ISD, but they are, some of those servers, only a relatively small portion of them, are directly GWP servers. The rest are other servers for other major systems. They're Linux servers, and we want to get 24/7 support for those servers because they are the ones that carry the most critical applications in the city. and we've actually got only one person on staff. So we want to move that forward. That's what that item is. The security software from 4 vendors. We had a conversation with you at the last meeting about security, and we indicated a number of the things we felt needed to be done, and we also indicated then that by no means have those been done. In fact, we're just getting started. These are 4 products that are relatively inexpensive. It's what we could afford this year to at least get us started. And the first of those products is vulnerability assessment product. That is to look at all of our servers, particularly in GWP, but we can, it turns out, use that software for anyone else in this, any other servers in the city, but to examine what are the most vulnerable patch vulnerabilities that we have, and to then work from the bottom up and start taking care of those situations. The next one is a tool we already have, Industrial Defender. We simply need to get it updated and brought into production. It's part of the AMI original package for in-depth packet testing and examining each packet to see what they are doing. The Palo Alto Networks is a new firewall. We have a firewall right now between the SCADA systems of GWP and the rest of the city, but it's a relatively old one, and we want to upgrade that to a better firewall. The full disk encryption, this is for laptops. GWP currently has about 75. This will cover us for about 100 laptops to have the disks on those laptops be encrypted to 56 KB so that we can protect them if they are lost or stolen. It has occurred that a laptop has been lost or stolen in this city, and there was a recent case at JPL in which in Washington, D.C., one of their laptops was stolen and was not encrypted. And so we want to be sure we don't have a problem with that as we do that. Later on, we'd like to then spread that out to other laptops throughout the city to ensure that sensitive information, a laptop is very easy to lose. Should it occur, we don't have any vulnerability. On the ARC Fiber Manager, what that is software that is GIS aware, that is very compatible with our ESRI GIS system from a company called Telvent. They make this a product that is designed to help you manage fiber pairs and allow you to document and know, using geography as well, where all the fibers are, how they connect, which fibers are used for what purpose, and enable you to do such things as say, oh, I need to go from this point to this point, calculate me a path that I can interconnect and get from one point to the other. So we don't have a product for doing this in the city. We need to do that, and it will be used directly for all of GWP's fiber, but eventually then for a good deal of other fiber that the city needs. Lastly, these last 2 items are the software maintenance items. The only one that has some relevance to, they're just updates and maintenance for ESRI, our GIS system, which GWP uses. The City Works also, it's an update on the maintenance renewal, which is a system that's being used by Water for their asset management very well, and we're hoping to extend that into other areas like Public Works, and we currently have it in Parks as well. The last item there is Everbridge. This is a emergency notification system. GWP has used that in the past, and this is simply to renew that maintenance, but to spread that cost out over all of the city.
I have a few questions. In terms of the EMC, I'll just go from the top, work my way down your list. The EMC backup systems. So with AMI, there will be an unprecedented and growing amount of customer data that we didn't have that kind of amounts in the past. Is your planning for storage and backup of data take that into account in terms of how that will escalate over time?
Yes. Actually, that was one of the incentives for us to get a new system. The city had a system that was very old. It was a Tivoli system that was aged. So that was the intent, to replace it with a much more industrial strength, robust system. This system already does back up AMI as it is currently, but can grow quite substantially.
And do we have protocols in place in terms of how much customer data over what amount of time that we will retain and at what points? In other words, what's the records maintenance protocols?
Good question. We are estimating a 3-year rolling storage for AMI. On that other slide, earlier slide, you saw the data warehouse business intelligence that we are planning to acquire and implement. And as we get closer into that, we will do a little finer cut at looking at exactly what we retain and what we lose. What we want to do is be able to do trend analysis, to be able to say, well, it was this at this time, now it's this at this time, and see some trends so that we can do some business intelligence. That will require considerable amount of data because you're not going to just keep one copy of things. You're going to keep several copies of it. In the industry, it's known as big data, and every industry today is doing this, and we're similarly needing to do that. So yes, there will be a lot of growth. The system we bought, however, has capacity to something like 2.3 petabytes of data. So we think we'll be in good shape for that.
Thank you. And I know we've covered this issue, which is in the past, but I just wanted to refresh on it, which is I know as a cost-saving measure, we came to an agreement with Burbank in terms of co-location and backups, so that if one system goes down, the other can power. But in a catastrophic event, we're geographically very close. So chances are, if we're impacted, they're impacted. Do we have outside of the area, outside of the state type of backup to keep things moving?
We're very aware of that. We're about 4 miles from them. And yes, that is a concern. And frankly, that's something we have on our agenda that we need to do that. We haven't done that yet.
Okay. So right now, Burbank is our only backup. Do you have any sort of forecast in terms of time frame when we'd look at a more fundamental solution?
Well, it's going to be, I would say it'd take about 3 months to get something like that together.
But I mean, will we have something in 3 months, or?
Yeah, it's not that difficult to do. We simply need to, get a vendor that we have a vendor right now called Iron Mountain. They have other facilities. We need to work out, okay, how do we get it off of that system, when, at what rate, and how
So
frequently.
we're currently looking at that? Okay, thank you. And then you mentioned this, moving on to the security area, so about laptops and encryption and all those things. Do we have governance and protocols in place in terms of what types of customer data are accessible by whom within the city or GWP, so that we limit, as to the degree possible, the exposure we have there?
Absolutely. In fact, I'm glad you brought that up, because what we have done in concert with this on the governance side is we looked at what policies the city had previously on security and felt they needed to be basically totally replaced. And we have done that. We have been working with all of the departments, including Water and Power, and have I'm not sure how many pages it is, but maybe 12, 14 page set of policies to have enacted. We are this close. Everyone's agreed. It's just need that final last time look at the city attorney's office, which I'm promised this week, and we will make that an administrative regulation of the city. That is the foundation piece for all the governance that will follow. And so it lays out basically what employees can and cannot do. Along with that, we've already started and we're ready to launch a security awareness program for that all employees of the city, and in fact everyone in the city who has any relationship to any of our systems, including contractors, will need to view, sign, and be aware of. And so that will establish a whole series of capabilities for, in effect, legislation that says you cannot do this, you must do that. And then we will build on that for all of our particular policies.
And if I may add, we also have a very stringent privacy policy that applies to all our data, as well as something called the FACT Act that we comply with that's designed to protect customer data from identity theft. And all GWP employees that have access to the information have to sign a confidentiality agreement.
It's great to know, because obviously, I bring these up because the privacy and cybersecurity, or the confidence of the customers in the system, is very critical. So it only takes one breach to lose that confidence, but a long time to earn it. So I just want to make sure we're doing all our due diligence to ensure customer data security and privacy, which I'm sure we had in place, but we have more exposure now with more data flowing and more systems. It obviously increases our responsibility in this area.
I couldn't agree more.
So my final question comes back to money, which is obviously over time, this is either to you or Mr. Zern, over time our GWP's needs from a budgetary perspective for IT needs will grow as we get more and more robust data and we do more things with that data to bring benefits back to the customer. Are we looking at how we're doing future forecasting for budgeting purposes in terms of IT needs?
Mr. President, members of the Commission, we certainly are forecasting and putting 5-year programs together for all of our capital budgets, including those related to the modernization, to the IT portion of modernization, along with other aspects of it as well. But as you're well aware, we will be dependent upon a revenue enhancement program in order to make that all come to fruition. But absolutely, we're planning it.
And we're working closely with them.
As always.
Thank you. Those are all the questions I have. Others?
I do have a question here. Just curious, at one point, about how many laptops do we have in the field?
75.
75? And primarily used by field personnel?
Yes.
For collections?
Well, we have 75 not at any one moment in time, but that's the total inventory.
Okay, that's with GWP or with the city?
With GWP.
With GWP. Oh, okay. Thank you.
I just have a quick question about the budget from GWP. You mentioned that some of these costs will be charged back to GWP. Can I ask how is the cost allocated or being shifted to fund these different projects? Because I understand we didn't have the money to begin with, so where's the money coming from?
The money for, Mr. Yao, the money for these, what we consider to be very basic components of the project and ones that will help us launch our go live and make some progress. Again, we've deferred a great deal of the business modernization, the smart grid and the smart meter, but it was my intention to get some momentum carried through during this period. So we took some power projects that were primarily in our power operation and deferred those in order to bring these projects online.
So the security ones that is being paid for by GWP directly on those items. Some of the others where the allocation takes place when it's ISD funding. And we have, of course, a whole internal service fund program whereby our services are allocated out to all the departments. And they have an item in their budget, and they pay that amount each month, and we provide the services. But we have to then do a fair allocation out to who gets what service, and it's pretty complex.
That was my question is kind of piggybacks on top of Commissioner Yao's. One thing that was interesting about your presentation, which was very detailed, and I appreciate that, was that for majority of the items that will be going to Council tomorrow, if I heard you correctly, a majority of these software upgrades and IT acquisitions will be of benefit to other departments and really will benefit citywide. And I think that's a positive and something that the community should understand and should see that that GWP's acquisitions and implementation of these softwares, et cetera, will benefit other departments and people in other parts of the city other than just water and power. So, but I was wondering, will there be some way to capture that so that someday, GWP will be able to report back to council and to the community that this was the value added to other departments?
Yes, let me make a comment about that because, and in fact, Steve and I have discussed this many times. We look to be absolutely fair. In other words, if there is something that GWP must acquire, needs to acquire, would have acquired if they were not part of the city, then they pay for it. If we're acquiring something that, well, GWP can use it, but others can use it as well, we are moving very much to the view of, okay, it gets allocated out. Everybody pays their share. What we're not trying to do is have GWP pay for things that other people get the benefit of. Now, that sometimes just happens. The vulnerability software, for example, they would need it no matter what. But it so happens that since we are the city of Glendale, we can acquire it and use it for others, and it's no harm, no foul. It doesn't cost GWP anything. It benefits everyone else. And any time we can do that, we do that. Because we want to see as much synergy in that as we possibly can. When the DOE came here and they saw what we were doing in terms of that, they were very, very enthusiastic and pointed that out in their review, that there was something exceptional that Glendale was doing that not everyone was doing, and that we were looking every time we could for those leverage points.
And council will hear that tomorrow.
Yes.
And council hears that when we make presentations about our budget as well.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I wanted to make very clear is because in the past I don't think it was always the case that we allocated out the cost to the other operations. We will absolutely be doing that from this point forward. But again, if it's a piece of software or hardware that the utility needs in and of itself, regardless of anybody else, and it's the same size. In other words, if it needs to be double the size for all operations, well then the rest of the operations can pay for the upsizing of that. But in those cases, we will highlight what the benefit to everyone is through the acquisition of that particular piece of software or hardware. But otherwise, the other city operations, including the Public Works Department, will pay their share through the cost allocation model. That's why, as you saw Ed give his presentation, he indicated some things were paid directly by GWP. Others, he's paying the cost of the money and then allocating it back, and that's where the
I think to the extent that you can clarify that in your presentation tomorrow to council, and really address that in a proactive way and mention the enthusiasm of the DOE, mention that it came here to council and we asked questions about that. I think that is something that the public would like to hear, and I'm sure that the council will have similar questions to ours. So,
Great suggestion. Thank you, Commissioner.
Yeah, I think this goes to this, I think it's important that we look at the delicate balancing act between GWP is, at the end of the day, an asset of the city as a whole. It's part of the city as a whole. It's not its own independent entity. While at the same time, though, we know that there's this, there's a certain amount of funds that that are transferred back to the city, and so I think sometimes it can get a little bit distorted in terms of what is paid for by GWP, especially when we get into the situation of rate increases and we start talking about these things where there are needs to keep the utility whole and operational and looking forward. So I think that's the balancing act here when we tell these stories, and I think the thing that Commissioner Dentler is highlighting is I think it's important to highlight these things which are not readily apparent, for the public so that they see what this interplay is. Because oftentimes it's only portrayed in one direction, and it's really not the case. Thank you very much. We do have a speaker, Mr. Herbert Milano.
President Armenian, members of the GWP Commission and staff, my name is Herbert Milano. I've always been wondering how a commission or commission members get to evaluate what is a fairly complex investment in capital improvements. I oftentimes envision myself, if I were in your shoes or in your seat, looking at the information that is presented, how would I know that the costs that are being assigned are appropriate? How do I know that the projects that are being established have been properly monitored? How do I know that? I think that there's a way by looking at what has transpired in the past and what assurances have been given throughout the years, sort of like a trend line or a trend narrative. I spent the last couple of days at the Central Library, the reference section, trying to validate the claims made by the City Council with regard to the transfers. So I started reading the financial statements going from 1975, which is the earliest one. And when I look at those financial reports, primarily the budgets, you see there's a particular narrative. It says, well, we're going to make this investment, and it's going to give us this savings. And you see these claims being made on the budget, on these financial reports. But what I don't get to see, neither at the City Council nor any commission, is a review of going back over the claims that were made the year before to see if they actually came to fruition, if the effectiveness was realized, if the cost savings were realized. I don't see that, especially one in an environment where you actually do have a fairly complex overlay between IT and the Glendale Water and Power. Up until about 4 years ago, the city was not doing allocations, at least not properly. They hired a separate firm, and they started actually doing the allocations like IT and allocating it legal and allocating it properly. And even though the city hired a professional company to do these allocations, I think they're called Capital, I forgot the exact name, they still hired a separate entity to do the new allocation revision having to do with GWP. And I was wondering, why in the world would they do that? Why would they hire another company to basically do a recalculation of these allocations when you already had a firm doing it professionally? Well, I know why. They're really manipulating the way the allocations were being done.
Mr. Milano, the topic is smart grid update, so I just want you to remain mindful of that.
Thank you very much. So as I look at the information technology and how it is applied, I think back as to what happened during the IT upgrades for the smart meter, whether those initiatives were there in those documents years before, whether they were there the year before that, and to see whether new technologies and new initiatives come in, whether they are aligned with the vision and the capital improvement plan that were set up back in 2007 and other years. And that's a problem that I think many commissions don't do. They don't review what was proposed and what actually came into effect years after. I'm making a suggestion that perhaps you need a report from the staff that will give you a year-to-year comparative as to what was proposed one year, what actually came back the following year and the following. One last other item having to do with IT and security. When I established a new account about a month and a half ago, I later on checked with my credit monitoring agency that the GWP did another credit check on me, even though I've had an account for 26 years, and even though most of the stuff you actually do a prepayment. So I just wondered that why we are required to, or the GWP goes through and gets a whole other credit check on people who are already customers, even though you actually make a deposit in prepayments. Anyway, that was another question. Thanks.
Can we ask the staff to fill us in on that last point, please?
Tammy, you want to please, Ms. Valle will come up and speak to that.
Actually, I'd have to come back to you on that. If he already has an existing account, we would typically just look at his existing record, and if there was no credit issue, then we would go ahead and establish the credit there. We do validate Social Security numbers, but not a full credit check. So I'd have to see what the case was, and to see if we actually did run his credit. So I could get back to you on that.
Would it be fair to say that if any individual had a question about whether a credit check was being required and why, that person could just contact your department?
Absolutely.
So if there are members of the public who have that concern and are wondering, they should call...
They could go ahead and just call our customer service call center at 548-3360. If they don't get the information that they need, they could escalate it to a supervisor or a senior. And of course, Mr. Milano has my direct line. He can contact me directly. But I'll definitely look into that. The other...
hold on. I'm not asking for you to report back to our commission unless other commissioners want that. I just want to make sure that members of the public who have a question about that know how to contact you or your staff, so that they have some redress. But I don't think we need to agendize that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I just have a quick comment on whether the review of capital projects or the effectiveness of different projects that we say we're going to do as part of the budgeting process. I understand that in the past we have major capital projects that gets completed, that we get a review and what happened and if it's on time or on budget. To what extent do we do a project review of any type or size? Do you know, Mr. Zone?
I'm sorry, if we do a review, we will. I'm not exactly sure all that was done in the past. I can tell you what we will be doing from going forward. We have a process at the end, and it's wrapping up a CIP project, capital project. We go through everything from before and after pictures to the duration, the number of change orders, the original cost estimate with contingency, the final cost estimate, the number of days that were originally budgeted versus the number of actual days. So it's a pretty thorough end of project review. Again, I'm not sure that if that was done in the past, it will be done. That's how we do things in the Public Works Department, and it works very well for us. And then we can always put a summary of that together. It doesn't need to be as detailed as that, and bring it back with the budget so you can see previous year plus what we're forecasting and projecting for the upcoming year. Because we will bring that budget presentation to you as a regular item, in that springtime before we actually present it to the council.
Is there a Public Works Commission that does that level of oversight?
There is no Public Works Commission, no. That's my responsibility. But I'd be happy to share that with you as well.
Well, to me, that seems, I'd be interested to hear what other commissioners say, but I wasn't here in 2007, so I can't speak to what went on before. But from my point of view as a commissioner who's been here now for, a couple of years, I'm satisfied that we get briefings and we have really careful attention being paid to our agenda forecast. We know we have an opportunity to ask about any particular project and have a backwards look. We ask for a lot of data from staff, and given the shrinking of staff and the multitasking that staff is doing, I have a concern that any one particular public comment would unnecessarily result in a whole new way of doing things unless other commissioners feel strongly about this. I don't personally feel a need to be that involved in the backwards look and review on each capital improvement project. I'm just one person, but I'm satisfied that we have plenty of opportunity to ask you individual questions in between our meetings, and we have plenty of opportunity at our meetings. So I definitely disagree with any perception by any one individual that there is some sort of cooking of books or past manipulation of figures, and that we are asleep on the job, or we don't get enough reports, or all of those things I think are very disparaging of us as commissioners. That I don't take those remarks personally. We have an obligation to provide proper oversight of expenditures, of course, but I would be cautious about asking staff to do more reporting of individual projects, but others may disagree.
So I don't think staff should be focusing more on the details and replying for reports and additional resources that's going to be used up. I do suggest that we have major projects that we get to review them, like the Cherry Chase Reservoir. We did a great job in looking at the budget and the review process, and like the utility modernization, the AMI project. I mean, we get a good briefing pretty much every commission meeting on this. So those are the type of high-profile projects that I suggest we would continue to do what we're doing to bring back to the commission and city council on what's happening, the progress that it takes, but not every detailed project. That's why I was thinking about if GWP staff has like a size of a project that would be worthwhile for us to review rather than just every project.
Starting to stray beyond the topic, and I just wanted to add one note, which is particularly with respect to this utility modernization project. Because it's grant funded, there's a great deal of reporting that we have to do, even outside of this commission, to document how we've spent the money, what we said we'd spend, what we actually spent, where the money went. So all those records are available for the public if they'd like to see them. But if this is a topic of interest to the commission, maybe we could take it up under future agendas and discuss further.
Yeah, the only thing I was going to say in response to the comment was that, the role of the commission is not to be the project manager or project oversight. That's what the staff is there for. That's what management is there for. Management has accountability to oversee their projects. And at the end of the day, that's where the accountability is, and, that's why they're there. And our job can be to look at the different projects, such as AMI, and examine them on some level. I agree with Commissioner Yao in terms of, some of the things that are higher profile that are major changes in the utility and the way we're doing things, such as AMI, warrant pretty close following by the Commission. But, maybe we can discuss that at forecast, and we can put an agenda item to make a decision in the future. I don't think it's an urgent item.
I have a couple of comments. I remember we used to have these scorecards, I believe it was quarterly, where, we were seeing what projects were
Red, yellow, and green.
right, on time and behind, and, which ones we were like a threat of just really falling behind or maybe spending too much, that type of thing. I noticed that we have not had one of those. Do we plan on resuming to that?
Commissioner Chan, probably not in the near future. Those were tied to the strategic plan. Doesn't mean we can't do it in another way. It was tied to a strategic plan that I am reviewing, but don't necessarily feel is applicable to this utility any longer. Especially just the way we've restructured ourselves to what our new mission and goals are, and what we're trying to accomplish in the upcoming year. But certainly, and I'm not completely familiar with what you're talking about, but I'll go back and talk to staff about that and take a look. And maybe there's just another way we can do it. Maybe we just call it the project scorecard, and
Project
it stands
review.
alone by
Exactly.
itself. But again,
That's right. So you can have all of your high-profile projects, and we can have an update. And with that, we'll know exactly whether it's on time, on budget, and if it is falling behind, why, and there's
Or
a record
decide
of it.
which ones to
Right, which ones to
spend more time
include.
on.
Exactly.
And we certainly would love to come before you and brag about the good work that we're doing. So I don't mind doing that at all.
Yeah, it does not have to have like the exact same list as before. I understand the strategic plan is changing, and you may not want to include all those projects, but that would be one good way of reporting.
We could do a
Status.
project update or something to that effect. We're a little slow right now, so we probably won't see a lot other than the business modernization, but I'm hoping full well that after the first of the fiscal year, we'll be able to come back to you and give you some significant project updates.
Okay, with that, then we'll move on to the next agenda item, but a question for the attorney. I know we did not, I guess, cover the consent on minutes. Two of the commissioners were not present at that meeting, so does that mean we need,
Yeah, we should,
Commissioner Yao?
we don't have a quorum to
Commissioner
entertain
Jemian.
that motion, so I'd suggest someone move to continue it, and then continue it to the next meeting.
okay. Do I have such a motion?
Well, we move to next
Sure.
meeting.
Yeah.
I won't be here in January. I'm not sure if Commissioner Jemian will be here either. There's only three of us who were here last time.
Well, then we could,
Move to February.
yeah, you could either move it to February, or you could move it to January.
Well, let's move it to January, and we'll deal with moving it again if we have to in January.
I
someone can make that motion, that'd be great.
move the approval of the minutes to January.
Second?
One of us can second? All right, I'll second.
Okay.
All in favor?
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, next agenda item, back to 3, I think.
3B, renewable energy update.
Mr. President, members of the Commission, we are scheduled to go before the City Council on December 11th to give a report on our renewable energy compliance and also talk about what is, or request their approval to enter into the Phase 2 of the SCAPA agreement, which is the development of these renewable type projects. Very important, as you well know, very important mandate that we're under, and one that is beginning as we get near and near 2020. We begin to have to look at what's in the best interest of the city, and some of these are expensive, and it's very strategic. It's getting very strategic in how we develop our portfolio. We've got some important decisions to make coming up in the next couple of years, and we want to position ourselves to be prepared to do that and do it in a way that's very prudent for us for the future, because some of these take long-term commitments, and we want to make sure that we're not getting into a knee-jerk reaction situation or based on limited data and find ourselves stuck with something over a long period of time. The staff has been doing a great job on this. We are compliant right now with about 20%, Mr. Lins. 33% is the goal, and in all that people do, I know you may well know, when you get to these mandates, it seems to always be that last 10-15% that can be the toughest to get, and sometimes the most expensive as well. So we really want to make sure that we're prepared, but part of what we wanted to do is to give you an update of where we are. There's a number of compliance periods that are going to be coming up, and then talk about the future of where we're going to go in the next, in the very near future, actually, and 2020 is not that far away. So with that, let me have Mr. Lins give you that update.
Mr. President, members of the Commission, excuse me, Steve Lins, Chief Assistant General Manager at Glendale Water and Power, and as Mr. Zern indicated, we're going to do kind of an overall update on renewable energy this evening, and I'm going to touch on 5 or a handful of areas. The first is going to be the status of our meeting our renewable portfolio standard obligations. Second is going to be a short discussion of some of the renewable resources we already have in our portfolio. We'll then talk about our SCAPA Phase 2 agreement. And in 2006, we entered into an agreement with SCAPA, which we're referring to as the Phase 1 agreement, that the SCAPA cities got together and to develop renewable projects together. And I'll talk a little bit about what happened in that agreement and the next phase of that agreement. I will then talk a little bit about some of the projects that SCAPA continues to look at to hopefully, as Mr. Zern indicated, get us the last mile in the obligation. And then finally, we'll talk about our RPS procurement plan for compliance period 1, which is 2011 to 2013. So first, I'd like to focus a little bit on our status of meeting the renewable portfolio standard obligations. And this chart is a little bit confusing, so let me walk through it one line at a time because it has a dual axis here. But that blue line at the top in megawatt hours is our retail load. So you can see from 2011 to 2020, our retail load is in the area of about 1.1 million megawatt hours, and it goes up slightly over time towards 2020.
And by retail load, just to clarify it in simple language, means both residential and business customers, right?
All the energy needs of our customers here in the city of Glendale. It just excludes any sales to customers, wholesale customers outside the city.
Okay.
Then there's 2 more lines, and the red line is just a depiction of our renewable portfolio standard obligation in percentage points. And so if you look at the right axis here, you can see 0 up through 50%. And across the bottom of this chart, you'll see 3 periods. Those are compliance periods. Compliance period 1, compliance period 2, compliance period 3. For compliance period 1, which is 2011 through 2013, over that time period, we have to average 20%. And that's 20% of the megawatt hours that we deliver, once again, to our retail load. So 20% of that, the blue line up there at the top of the chart. In compliance period 2, we have to reach 25% by, and you'll see it kind of ramp up here during the year of 15 to 16. We have to reach 25% by 12/31/2016, and then compliance period 3 has us reaching 33% by 12/31/2020.
And these are numbers that are, I mean, this, for example, the retail load and the obligations, it's an annualized number? In other words, it's that much megawatt hours over a year?
Yes.
Oh, it's not over that compliance period?
Well, I mean, this is, so for example, in 2011, our retail load's about 1.1 million megawatt hours. And in 2012, it's about 1.1 million megawatt hours for that calendar year.
That calendar year,
Right.
That's what I'm getting at, okay.
So each year, the retail load is about 1.1 million megawatt hours.
No, I know that. I don't think that's what, that's not what I was asking
Well,
about.
that's kind of where I was starting from, but you were asking something
Well,
different.
so what I thought you were asking was what I'm asking, which is just the most simple way to ask us at the highest ramp-up period for that last compliance period. When we hit that, when we're approaching that final push, trying to get up to meet the legal obligation towards the end, will our renewable usage be calculated over the period of the third period, or will the state only look at how we're doing in year 2020?
Oh, so I see what you're asking. So in compliance period 1, it has to be 20% averaged over the 3 years.
Average.
Okay, thank you. That's what I want.
But in compliance period 2, that changes. They want you to kind of average that over the final year of the compliance period.
Oh.
And in compliance period 3, it's the same thing. They want you to average that amount over the final year of that compliance period.
Oh, okay, so the answer is it is complicated.
Yes. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the renewable resources we have in our portfolio now. And these are resources that were developed under that SCAPA Renewable Development Agreement Phase 1. The first is Ormat Geothermal. That's in California. And I'm going to give you some percentages for each of these projects. And those percentages are percentage of retail load, or I kind of think of it as RPS equivalent. So, for example, Ormat is about 1.6%. So it's 1.6 RPS. It's not 1.6% of the 33%. It's just 1.6% of our retail load. High Winds is the wind project in California. That's about 2.4%. Pebble Springs is in Oregon. That's about 5.3%. That's a wind project. Pleasant Valley in Wyoming, another wind project, 2.65%. Tieton is a small hydro plant that we own with Burbank, 50/50 up in Washington, and that's about 2.16%. And Grayson, which has turned out to be a great renewable resource for us, is at 7.34% now. And later on in the presentation, I'll talk a little bit about what we can do to burn that in some more efficient units and probably squeeze out another 3 to 4% of RPS percentage. And then finally, this will give you a sense of how far we have to go in local solar. So we have here Glendale Community College, which is small solar. It's only 0.04%. So we've got a long way to go on local solar.
Total up the figures you just gave us?
We will go to the next page, and I'll show you.
Thanks.
So this is a snapshot of our entire portfolio. You'll see in the green, big green slice of pie there at the top of the pie chart, it's about 20.5% renewable. And this is our expected for calendar year 12. And you have to understand, we have two moving targets. The actual retail load itself at the end of the year is, you don't know that until the last hour, the last day of the year, because it's retail load actually delivered for the year. So that's a little bit of a moving target. It's not going to be too far off that chart I showed you that had the 1.1 million megawatt hours across the top. And then likewise, the output of all those projects that I showed you, and I gave you percentages, those are estimates because some are wind and some are geothermal, and the wind is generated as the wind blows, and we don't completely control that. But you can see here that we've got about 20.5% now, and I wanted to highlight a few things related to this. First of all, on the left, up here, there's 3 wind options that total about 7.5%, and that's this green slice right here. Those are options that we have with LA to purchase a share of those projects if we would like to and if we think it makes sense to do that. So that's available. It's in our back pocket. Those options are good for the next 1 to 3 years depending on the project and the commercial operation date of the project. I'd also like to highlight here, you see this large hydroelectric, 5.1%. That's Hoover. And before the state mandate was adopted this last year, we counted Hoover. A lot of people say, hey, that's renewable energy. And basically the state legislator told us, fine, if you want to include that, we'll just increase your percentage to 40% instead of 33%.
What's the argument that it's renewable?
That it's not renewable.
It's already existing, I think, is
the
part of
argument
what the problem is. They want the development of new renewable plus. As if you go through these renewable projects, there's a lot of job creation that's tied to those. So our sense was that it's a pre-existing project. It isn't. If we count that, they'll just increase the overall renewable portfolio to still get that 1/3 that they're looking for.
Sure, but what's the argument that it was a renewable resource?
The argument that it was?
Yeah.
The hydrologic cycle. I mean, the water evaporates, clouds form, it rains, it flows down to the ocean, evaporates, and the cycle goes over and over and over again.
Okay.
And that's the same reason why small hydro is renewable. And the definition for the state for small hydro is below 20 megawatts, I think. 30 megawatts, pardon me. What else do I want to highlight on here? One other highlight is the coal. You'll see the coal that's expected for calendar year 2012 is only 30%. And if you'll recall the power content label that came out for 2011, it was at 35 or 36%. And that's because we had a fire at San Juan and we had some outages at IPP. And so just every year that number changes a bit. So now this brings together that line chart that I showed you earlier. And basically the difference between the red line and the blue line is our short position, or the amount that we have to go out and get. So you can see here we're kind of covered, as we mentioned, up through that first compliance period. And then as we get beyond 2015, this gap in between the requirement and what we have is what we need to fill. And then the green line down here shows if we don't procure anything else, what our short position would be over time. And so we're basically positive through 2015, and if we didn't procure any other renewable resources, then we would turn negative and be short in terms of not meeting the obligation that's required for that compliance period.
And what are the ramifications of that?
There's a whole regulatory structure. I'm not, as I recall, there's fines. I don't know exactly if they're up to $1 million a day, but there's a...
I don't know the exact amount, but stiff fines and penalties.
There are also, and I will get into this actually in a future slide, there is an out clause that basically says, if there are circumstances beyond your control, where you weren't able to comply in a timely manner, you're basically excused from complying. And we're not quite sure what that is yet. But there is some language in there that gives you some flexibility if there's some circumstance beyond your control that, wouldn't let you do it.
And who decides whether or not you're excused?
CEC. So I would like to talk a little bit now about SCAPA Phase 2 Development Agreement.
I'm sorry, but can I ask a question
Sure.
before you move into this? You don't need to go back into the slides, but one thing I've been wondering about to improve my own understanding of how the contracts and options work, quick question on that. When a provider of a renewable energy source enters into a contract either with us directly or say LA, and that's our option that we could choose to exercise, Does that provider of the renewable energy source, do they effectively guarantee that they will have that much, say, wind-generated energy to provide to the utility? Or, back to your example of, well, winds change every day, so you never really know. I mean, there must be, these things must be represented in terms of the final deal.
No, it's true, and it depends. We have some deals that are just power purchase agreements where you just pay for what's delivered. And they have to, there's wind forecasts and they have to deliver within a certain range, and if they don't, they make it up through the market and deliver it.
Okay.
Then there's projects where we actually just go out and purchase a wind farm. And there's an estimate of whether it's going to be, a certain level of certainty of delivery, whether it's a 90th percentile, 95th percentile. And then there's balancing accounts related to that. So really it's contract specific, and there are guarantees and there's mechanisms for making sure that we get the benefit of our bargain through the contract.
So there are different deals for different kinds of energy and for different purveyors of those energies, and then it's our own staff that is, or do we outsource those decisions?
Well, it's actually a perfect segue into this, the SCAPA Phase 2 development agreement, because SCAPA is a joint powers authority of basically 13 public utilities here in Southern California, and we decided that it makes sense for us to all get together and hire experts to help us make decisions on either power purchase or project purchase. We're outright buying the project. So we signed an agreement like this in 2006, and all the cities got together and got experts to basically build a team to go out and look at all of these projects. And let me just flip forward, since you asked that question, to the next slide, and then I'll flip back. But here's the type of activities that we did in Phase 1 and in Phase 2. And we put together technical and legal professionals, environmental consultants, bond counsel, and others that help us with due diligence. I remember we had counsel in Oregon read through every single wind lease for a wind project that we have an option on. Hundreds of wind leases, going through to check the language to make sure that they were okay and that what we were getting what we thought we were buying. And then other things, technical studies like these interconnection and feasibility studies. So that's the whole purpose of kind of teaming up with SCAPA, is to get the resources we need to make those decisions, because a lot of us are too small to have that expertise in-house. So Phase 1 started in 2006. We have run out of money in that agreement. We spent about $430,000 developing that list of projects that I just went through with you. And the future development is going to be the same type of arrangement. However, Phase 2, we've learned some lessons from Phase 1. And Phase 2 is going to be structured in a way so that we have a little bit more control over our own expenses. There's going to be a Glendale-specific sub-accounts for projects that we have to opt into, and the money won't be pooled, so we'll have a little bit more control on capping our expenditures and making sure that things don't go over budget. Finally, the Phase 2 agreement should last long enough to get us to 2020. We think it's going to be about $750,000 over a 5 to 7 year period, where we're going through the same type of process. I think right now SCAPA is looking at somewhere in the area of 200 projects, and they have a rolling RFP, and they're constantly getting new project proposals in, and the team is constantly reviewing those proposals and trying to, put the deals together.
What is cooperative funding through SCAPA? Second bullet point.
Well, that's exactly what I was describing when I talked about us pooling our resources to hire.
Oh, you're talking about the hiring side, the personnel
team
side.
Yeah, we put a team together, so there's cooperative funding there, and then there's also SCAPA issues bonds for a project. If we buy a project, they may issue bonds in the name of SCAPA,
Okay.
and then the participants all pay their pro rata share based on their percentage of the project.
Okay, thanks.
So I think that's all I have to say.
Mr. Lentz, I'm just curious about that process. Do each of these, Phase 1, Phase 2, and the cooperative funding, and also the bonding from SCAPA, do those require city council approval every step of the way, or something that they say, once it's approved, then you have the discretion to do as you please?
No, that's a good question. So what happens is the development agreement itself goes to council, and that's approved. And then as we develop projects, and when we go to council, we'll have a list of proposed projects, and I'll show you some of them in an upcoming slide. And as we develop them to the point where people are ready to pull the trigger, well, then we have to come back to council and give them the details of the projects and get the okay from council to go and issue the bonds to participate in the project. So you bring back each project that you're ready to participate in to council for another approval on a project-by-project basis.
So it sounds like each SCAPA member has his own process, and it potentially go through each council member for approval for the cities. So what happens if one city decides to not participate? Does the whole project falls?
Well, no. Typically, there's step-up provisions in those agreements. So, and actually, historically, Los Angeles is so big that they've typically just taken it. So, for example, there's a 200-megawatt wind project, and LA's got 195 megawatts, and we've got 5. If we pull out, they just take it. In fact, we just pulled out of a solar project, and they just took it. And if they don't, they ask around everybody else, and if they don't, there are some step-up provisions in some of these that will kind of force everybody to step up.
Thanks for
But
the explanation.
that's how it's worked. So finally, I want to talk about our renewable portfolio standard procurement plan. And the state mandates that for the first time that we actually bring this plan to council. And it has to be adopted by December 31st, and it's December 3rd, so we're going to council on the 11th. The regulations that specifically detail exactly how and what we can use for compliance still haven't been adopted. So we're bringing a general procurement plan. We expect those regulations to be finalized in early 2013. But in the meantime, our procurement plan basically relies on short-term purchases of energy and renewable energy credits. And I just mentioned a moment ago that we pulled out of a solar project. We revisited this issue with our financial condition, and we went to the Risk Management Committee and looked at what we were doing with renewables. And given that our CIP was cut to almost nothing, we decided that for the short term we should just focus on compliance. And so the procurement policy now just focuses on that compliance period 1. And we're almost there. So the little bit that we have to get for compliance period 1, we're going to go out and just buy in the market. And there's various ways, let me get into the next page. There's various products that you can buy to comply. They call them bucket 1, bucket 2, bucket 3. And I don't want to spend too much time diving into that. But basically, the bucket 1 product is something that is, the point of interconnection is a California Balance Authority. And this was part of the California legislature's effort to give incentive for jobs in California. They wanted a certain percentage of the renewable energy to come from California. And so ultimately it'll be 50% that has to come from bucket 1. And then bucket 2 is firmed and shaped and then delivered into a California Balancing Authority. And firmed and shaped is basically we've got some wind projects. The wind blows in the middle of the night when we don't need it. And so we have deals, firming and shaping deals, where a counterparty takes that wind as it blows and serve load wherever, and then they give it back to us on peak for certain times of the year, March through October. And so that product is a bucket 2 product. And then the bucket 3 product basically is unbundled RECs. They call them TRECs. They're tradable renewable energy credits. And you can fulfill 25% of your obligation with that. So for this short-term first compliance period, we're just going out and trying to, comply as cheaply as we can.
I'm guessing bucket 3 is premium cost?
No, actually, bucket 3 is the cheapest.
It is? Oh, because you can get it from anywhere.
Because you can get it from anywhere. And in fact, off the top of my head, we were just looking at a renewable energy credit deal. The bucket 1 was $27. The bucket 2 was about $7 or $9. And the bucket 3 was 50 cents. And so we want to get as much of that 50 cents TRECs as we can. So, let's see, what haven't I covered on this? And there's the out clause that I talked to you about earlier. This is basically language from the statute that says that, look, if you really are circumstances beyond your control that delayed your compliance or reduced, you can come to them and make your case. And I mean, at the end of the day, they want people just to be making a good faith effort, I think, to reduce emissions. And so that is there. We hope to never have to use it. This is a list of new renewable resources that SCAP is looking at and will develop under the Renewable Development Agreement Phase 2. And I put the wind options at the front of this list only because we haven't purchased them yet. So I guess we're not really still looking at them, but they're there for us to use. That first project is about 5%. Linden and Milford are about 1% each. We are looking at developing actually geothermal assets in Imperial Valley with IID and LADWP, and we're even participating in well testing, drilling some test wells. And as what we get in return for that participation and taking some of that risk is that at the end of the day, when they're developed and if they're successful, we'll get a price that's probably about 80% of market instead of 100% of market on geothermal. That's about 1.5%. Here's the landfill gas at Grayson that I mentioned to you. And if we get around to repowering Grayson, and if we get some units that are more efficient, we could squeeze probably an extra 3 to 4% of renewable energy out of those units. We are looking at some solar in California. It's about 3%, and then finally some biomass in Washington that's about 1.45%. So those are the types of projects that we're currently reviewing with SCAPA. And I'd like to finish with this, and it's not that easy to see up here. You should have it. Oh, actually, I don't think you do.
Yeah, they do.
We do.
They do. Okay. This is just a great overview of our entire system, and you can see it spans the entire western United States. The green squares are our generation. You can see in the far right up there next to the box with all the megawatt numbers, you can see Pleasant Valley wind. That's our wind way out there in Wyoming. Our coal down in New Mexico and nuclear in Arizona. It's just, I think, a really good overview of the entire system, and it gives you a sense of just how huge the system is.
What's biomass?
Let me do we know? Lon, can you please come up and talk about the specifics of the Washington Biomass Project and what?
Oh, I just wanted a quick answer. What does it mean?
Biomass, this is Lon Peters. I'm the power planning manager.
Thank you.
There's a paper mill in Longview, Washington, which is going through a repowering, and they're proposing to take out old boilers and put in new boilers. They use wood byproducts to create electricity. And it can be anything from the waste that's left in the forest to the residuals when they make the paper. They can burn those chemicals off and make electricity out of those as well. So there are several different processes at the paper mill that all use different kinds of wood products.
But at the end of the day, it's burning those materials, right?
It's combusting them to boil water to create steam to turn a turbine. Yeah.
There's other biomass as well, but that's that particular project.
Thanks.
And then so finally, the final point I want to make with this map is that, so when we look at scaling in renewables, we've got this transmission that goes here from the Northwest into Los Angeles and out here from Utah into Los Angeles, and we've got transmission around the western United States. So our plan is always to try to put projects right next to that transmission, because that's probably the single most difficult thing with renewables is getting them home. And we've been lucky enough that we've had this legacy system, and you'll see pretty much all of our projects are along that backbone system, and it saves us a lot of money. We don't have to go out and build new transmission, which would probably take 10 to 15 years anyway. So with that, I will open it up to questions.
I'm just curious about the landfill gas that we use. I understand, or I recall from last year, that we sold some to Pasadena. Is that a one-year deal, and then we're not going to be doing that anymore?
Yes, we sold some of our 2011 energy because we didn't anticipate that that was going to be a compliance year for us, and Pasadena was looking to have some 2011 credits regardless. So we sold, it was an 18-month deal. There was Pasadena and one other counterparty, and I think we made about $5.5 million on that wholesale.
But we won't be selling any renewable from our utility anymore. Is that the case?
Well, it depends. I mean, we have certain situations where we might want to sell and buy some around the position to optimize it. I mean, but I wouldn't say we're absolutely never going to sell anything. It depends on opportunities that become available. For example, we have some grandfathered resources that are bucket one, and you could sell bucket one resources and replace them with a mix of bucket 1, 2, and 3. And so you can end up making some money on
Yeah, it sounds like it's a good
optimizing
opportunity,
around that position.
But it just sounds like we want to take advantage of opportunity, but not in terms of not meeting compliance. So that's still the case, right?
No. Yeah, and the like I said, the 2011 sale was because at the time we didn't anticipate having an obligation for that year. And so now we're circling back, and we've got to meet the average 20% over 2011, 2012, and 2013.
So if
we're not that far off.
If by the end of 2013, if we didn't get that 20%, will we look back and say that we shouldn't have made that sale to Pasadena?
Well, we will get it, and we'll just buy it in the market. It's that simple.
But that's part of the maybe review process. If we look back, that we're paying more than what we got from Pasadena, $5.5 million. Wouldn't you say that that was a bad move then? Just looking back, just in
yes,
case.
but we will pay less.
Okay. Keep you to that word next time.
Well, if we could afford any capital improvement projects, say Glendale won the lottery that doesn't exist, but say we had the dollars, and would it be fair to say that it would be cost-effective to use capital improvement dollars if they existed to have a project closer to home, that you don't have to use these transportation lines? I understand right now that these have been useful to us, but say we could build another solar project or something closer to home, would that be on your wish list?
Yes, it is, and that's a good point, because we are looking at distributed generation. We are looking at things like ice bears, 10 megawatts of ice bears, which would be in the city. LADWP is restructuring its transmission tariffs, and our cost for transmission could go up significantly. And so, to your point, it's a great point. The more that we can put right inside Glendale, the more we can avoid that transmission cost. So we are looking at that. We're looking at some local solar projects and some other distributed generation. They haven't quite gotten to a scale that's significant yet, but we are looking at that.
I mean, I guess I remember when the law was enacted that the media talked about the $1 million a day. I don't know if that's accurate, but let's say it's accurate, $1 million a day fine. I think the community expects us to be proactive and think about developing projects in partnership with private sector or with other communities in the area that where we're not, several years out from now, we're not turning to our lawyers and hoping that we can utilize that escape clause and hearing that we don't have a very good case for the utilization of the escape clause, and we're looking at millions and millions of dollars, and I can just imagine council hearing that. So I know this isn't our year for capital improvement projects, but I think that to the extent that council and our community understand that we're looking at potential huge fines right within our lifetimes and our children's lifetimes, that we should have a welcome mat out for private sector partners who would be interested in coming to our town where the sun shines most of the time. And I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir talking to you, but ideally that would be something to have on our wish list as we are watching the approach of that final year. So you're not scrambling to spend today's dollars on these bucket list acquisitions just to try to stave off these fines.
Right. No, we do. We do have the Ice Bear project, and Shoal is another great example of a project just like that, where you can get an extra 3 to 4% of RPS out of your own backyard. So we're going to be looking at that at SCAPA, and actually potentially bringing in partners like Los Angeles or others who might want to participate in that and see if there's a way to, increase that RPS output.
So Shoal that's where I live, and people mention it from time to time, and I never know what to say. So that is a potential project in the future.
Well, there's a project there. Go ahead.
I know it exists
It's
already.
a planned
but it's not-
project. In fact, when I was up there, I briefed the residents on that. It's a biomass project using the organic waste.
That's what I was wondering.
Comes
You would
into
call
the
that a
landfill.
biomass project?
Yeah.
And in this case, it's anaerobic digestion, so it isn't burning.
That's why I was asking
One
the
of the
burning
issues
question.
in California is that any project we develop here, we have to abide by pretty stringent regulatory regulations that, aside from just the renewable issues. So that's a project that we're involved with right now. We've been at it for about 2 years. And to the extent we can create very pure, much purer than coming out of the landfill gas or methane gas that we can then use to burn at the facility or the repowered facility, however we're able to do that.
And that's actually a separate project from the one I mentioned. I mentioned just squeezing out an extra 3 to 4
Right.
megawatts of the existing landfill gas. And Steve's folks are looking at another project that will actually, create gas from trash as opposed to the gas that's already coming off it. And that could be a potential for more renewable energy.
My last question is about large commercial entities. When we attract a large-scale corporate headquarters, or a builder comes in and builds out, DreamWorks or some other large commercial entity, I take it from past meetings that, am I understanding correctly, that even if a developer included a solar project on the roof or somewhere on the property, that we're not set to allow that energy to come back into the grid, right? So that wouldn't be considered, that's not considered a potential source of renewable into our...
No, it can come in now, and it can come back in, although...
For a private developed project?
we're looking at something called the feed-in tariff, which will make that more workable. But right now, private...
I mean, say DreamWorks or Nestle saw fit to put an enormous solar project on the top of their parking structure like we have at the college. Does that just benefit the corporation that invests those dollars, or does that energy savings from that individual developer or corporation come back into our...
Well, I guess it depends. So we do have a solar incentive, and to get that incentive, people have to sign a contract that says that we're going to get the renewable energy credits, first of all.
Oh, okay.
And then for those who are generating more than they're using, that goes against their bill and actually turns their meter backwards. So...
But is it considered part of our, what was your phrase,
Yes.
retail load?
Yes.
Yes,
It is.
that's
Okay.
Steve's referring to. As part of the agreement they signed, we get the renewable energy credit for it that goes towards this.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
I have a question. Earlier, when you were going over this one slide that's right after Mind the Gap, you talked about money, running out of money. On phase one, started in 2006, and I think you threw out a number like 430 million?
430,000.
Thousand, okay. And then you went on and you talked about phase two, and then phase two agreement should last long enough to achieve RPS compliance through 2020, and then you mentioned 750,000?
Yes.
And that's what you're estimating to be our cost?
Yes.
Or for 5 to 7 years?
Yes, and that includes, and it's a little bit higher because we're anticipating taking the entire repower of Grayson through SCAPA. It will have Shoal as a renewable component, so it'll be one big renewable project with Shoal attached to it. So we will be looking at SCAPA partners, Burbank has Magnolia, and they're SCAPA participants. We plan on developing the repower of Grayson through SCAPA. And so it's a little bit higher than what we've spent to date, but it includes that project, and it's our estimate of what we think we're going to spend on development through 2020.
Okay, and that should give us the 33%?
Yes. Well, that's just development costs. So that $750,000 is for development of projects, and then you pay for the projects in addition to that. This is just to work the projects up and get them ready for signing a contract or buying an actual physical project. These are development costs. And most of these development costs are costs for projects that didn't work out. Because the projects that do work out, we issue bonds, and those bonds reimburse all of that development cost. So that first 430, that was for projects that we developed to a point. So, for example, La Paz, I don't even remember La Paz, the 2,400-foot tower out in the middle of the desert. Well, that deal fell apart, so all the money that we put into developing that is part of that $430,000.
Okay.
Just let me clarify for the Commission. Once that project is approved to go to development, then we will pay our share of that development. And I can tell you that's one of the reasons why this SCAPA organization and putting our projects through SCAPA is so beneficial to us. When we say we're not big enough to do these projects are tens of millions of dollars in some cases. So we get a small percentage. For instance, let's take IPP. That's a big project. If it repowers to something other than coal, which is what their goal is looking at, that was a $5 billion project when it was originally built in the early 90s. Imagine what that would be to repower it. So taking advantage of this group, especially where you have such a big player as LA, who has almost an insatiable appetite right now for renewable energy, we can really ride their coattails for a reasonable cost.
And our percentage on most of these development projects are like in the 5 to 10% range. So we'll take 5 megawatts of a 100 megawatt project, and we pay 5% of the development costs.
If you can go back to the generation portfolio slide, the pie chart. There's one thing in this scenario that we often kind of an issue that we skip over that's useful for people to hear about, and that is this. There's sometimes a misperception that you can just swap out renewable for baseload generation, and baseload being those sources that are available 24/7 and are reliable. So could you comment on two things? One is kind of the balancing act in terms of baseload that you need versus how much renewable you can integrate, kind of intermittent renewable you can integrate into our system and yet keep GWP as a reliable source of energy? And what does the reliability picture look like as we start to get closer to the RPS goals? And, there are some people advocating out there for even higher RPS goals.
Well, I'll start with this kind of a simple baseload example. I mean, most of our coal and our nuclear and large hydro and geothermal are baseloaded. So
natural gas.
Some of our natural gas is, a lot of it's not baseloaded. For example, we've got gas going into the plant, but we're using 10 to 15% of Grayson most of the time. So it's not really baseload, except for the Shoal Canyon portion that we have to burn. So we have this certain minimum load, and when you get into the middle of the night, sometimes you don't need all of that. And so we've got to lay that off. And then if you have wind blowing in the middle of the night, that's more power you don't need. So then we have to figure out how to integrate that into the system. For example, we pay a good amount of money. I mentioned that firming and shaping agreement where we give that wind to a counterparty, and as the wind blows, they give it back to us. That's a significant amount of money per megawatt hour that we pay to do that. So that's a cost, an integration cost. And you have a similar issue with solar, although you saw we don't have much solar yet. But solar can jump around a lot more than you think during the day, and so you've got to be able to react. And you usually react with gas peakers and systems like that. And at some point, when the technology gets there, you react with batteries and other parts in the system that you can use to do that, and that costs money. And so on reliability, as you get to that point where you've got more variable resources, it's a juggling act that gets harder and harder to do and takes, money and resources to get it done.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I wanted to point that out because I think we often leave that out of the conversation, assuming people get that, but I think people have the misperception that it's just you just swap things out. It doesn't matter what the type of source is, and when you're trying to run reliability is, there's an expectation, right, by the customer that electricity is always going to be there. We need to, you as the responsible party, as GWP, have a very increasingly complex job on the reliability side of the equation when you're trying to integrate all these different types of new sources. So people like renewables because it's clean, but they also will like reliability, right? And those things don't necessarily always work in the same direction. So that's the balancing act, I think, that all utilities are playing as they move toward increased percentage of the portfolio being from intermittent renewable sources. If there's no other questions, we do have a speaker, Mr. Herbert Milano.
Members of the Glendale Water and Power Commission and staff, my name is Herbert Milano. I want to ask a couple of questions concerning another possible way of looking at this renewables as a percentage of the total power needs. There is this whole other side, which is the area of conservation. Years ago, when I was proposing the smart meter, similar to the way it was implemented in Canada, where they found a 20% savings, 20% reduction by the active and effective use of smart meters for low-income homes. That was the original idea behind at least proposing the idea of smart meters. But all things being equal, if population doesn't increase, if we do not have any additional, let's say, major increases in the number of dwellings, today we have about 73,000 dwellings in Glendale, then the demand, as far as residential is concerned, we should expect it to drop. And if it drops, we could say that percentage that drops is the amount of coal energy that you're not using, making the renewable part of your portfolio a little bit larger. So I was wondering how that plays into the overall plans. If you're conserving the energy, you don't have to build it. Now that you have two problems, the problem of the lack of capital investments for GWP, and you have coming up the more effective use of the smart meter systems, should we not then expect a reduction overall in the demand? Now, of course, there's a caveat. I know that we have about 3,000 new dwellings that have come up in the last couple of years, creating a major demand on electricity, about a 4% additional increase. But were it not for that, could we expect a significant drop by effectively promoting this new technology and actually moving towards conservation as a way of meeting that goal? That's my question.
Thank you, Mr. Milano. It's a valid question. I don't know if you want to address it, Mr. Lenz.
Sure, Mr. President, members of the Commission. We have a dual mandate. One is a mandate for energy efficiency, where we have to increase energy efficiency by about 1% a year, and we've been meeting that mandate. So the load forecast that I showed you from 2011 to 2020 that was very slowly climbing has embedded in that a reduction in load from energy efficiency and from conservation. And so it's there, and then the second part of the mandate is the renewable portfolio standard, and that mandate, the formula is percentage of retail load, and so that's why we have to match it that way. But so the conservation is there. It's a separate mandate. We're meeting that mandate, and if we weren't, that load forecast would be rising much more quickly.
Thank you. I think that energy efficiency programs are something we could take a look at in the future, and it's worth taking a look at that as well. But part of the smart meter premise is also to help shift kind of shave the peaks so that you can shift the required load from peak to off-peak, and therefore be more efficient with the resources that you have, especially the ones that you said you wouldn't need at night, for example, when load is less.
And another component of it is to increase the consumer's awareness of when and how to use energy efficiently, and so that's another aspect.
Yep. Okay, next agenda item.
4, oral communications.
We have one speaker, Mr. Milano.
President Armina, members of the GWP Commission and staff, my name is Herbert Milano. I have a wish list for next year. A wish list with regard to things that I would love to see the Commission take up. There are several of these items that has been in my mind as I watch you debate and consider many of the proposals. The very first one is a proposal that your packets, especially when I see these 3-inch packets, I always wonder how in the world you get the time to dig through all that detail, is that there be a much more synthesized report that allows you to just get a nice quick snapshot as to where the utility is. An example of that would be if you were to take the capital improvement plan for, let's say, electric. And you say, okay, here are the 6 major components of the electrical capital improvement needs. And these are the investments or the outputs that both, let's say, that are planned for it, and then see a trend line year to year. That way, when you get the report, you're able to see, this is where we were 3 years ago, this is where we are now, and this is the expected trend. Same thing with regard to the water utility. If we had done so, it's my opinion, that the commissions in the past would have been significantly more demanding in ensuring that the transfers that go back into the city's general fund would have been constrained. Because as you are now aware, with very little capital improvement, you're putting a significant number of neighborhoods at risk and so forth with regard to the water pressure and fire and so on. There's something of interest, though, that when I look back at those financial statements and look at how the wording was done, and I spent a considerable amount of time looking at the charter, I'm going to talk about the transfers. It is very clear and it's stated on the budgets, going back at least through the 1975 budget that I began to look at for this past 25 years, 30 years, that it says very clearly that there is a revenue, less expenses, less an allocation for capital improvement, and whatever is left over is put as a reserve. So there is a public service reserve or surplus account that is being maintained. And then you actually see that there is a transfer made from the reserves to the general reserve fund. Not to the general fund, but so it's basically the surplus fund to this reserve fund. That surplus fund is being maintained. It's reported every year in the budget. And that was the method in which the utility maintained a prudent approach towards its finances. It had its revenues, it allocated its expenses, it projected its capital needs, and then there was a surplus, and the surplus was maintained in a separate fund. Then from that fund, some of the money sometimes went back into the utility because there were additional capital improvement needs, and there was a reserve there, and then part of that money went into the general reserve fund. So that surplus fund that was maintained by the public utility was maintained year after year. And it is also explained in a narrative, the purpose for it and why it was maintained. So back in 1941, if you were to look at the status of the financial statements, the utility had a humongous, very, very large reserve or a surplus. It was so large that if you were to apply 25% of the revenues, you still have a reserve left over. It was that big. It was growing so fast that it was estimated that by 1945 it was going to be around 54% of all revenues. And that's why the wording of the charter was the way it was. But if you look at the actual transactions, it was always the same way. So the charter proposal that basically does away with a surplus, it also does away with a general fund reserve. It's amazing. We're doing away with the reserves, and we're doing away with the surplus. It just basically is a line item completely against the revenues. I'll gladly send you the analysis and the copies of all of these documents, but this is huge in two regards. It means that if there isn't enough money in the utility, there will always be that transfer, which is going to cause the rate to be increased. The worst part about it is that it is a fallacious and misleading charter amendment that impacts the utility. Take a close look at it. Thank you very much.
Mr. President, members of the Commission, as you're aware, this has already been approved by the City Council. We'll be going towards the ballot. This is an issue that was well vetted at the council meetings. The City Attorney did an outstanding job in going back and clearly identifying what the intent of the framers of the Charter Amendment and how they felt the utility and the transfer should be treated. As far as the Charter Amendment, if you're interested, I think Mr. Elliott would be happy to come before you next month and just tell you a little bit about what's going on the ballot. If that's something you're interested in, we can do that. We got a pretty full agenda, but a few things that we can move off. But otherwise, this is a subject that's been well vetted and discussed and voted on, to be honest with you. At least by the council, now it goes to the people.
So let's defer that. That actually was one of two items on my list that I was going to bring up under agenda forecast. So the timing is coincidental, but so let's shift that to that point, and we can talk about what we want to put on agenda forecast. Okay, next agenda item.
5A, from the source electronic newsletter.
Mr. President, members of the Commission, this is one of those bragging items that I wanted to bring up and go over with you. The source newsletter, you're familiar with that. It's been something that's been in GWP for a while. However, we converted it from a hard copy mailed document into a electronic version of that. So staff had to go in and create this. I also had suggested that we begin to use the source as a tool to not only help us get more education out to the public, but also to highlight some of the great things that our staff does, because I think they do a lot of great things. Ms. Hartunian has done tremendous work on this, and I thought it would be a good idea if she came up and went over the new electronic version, which we've had one edition go out, and she's got some of the results of what the feedback on that has been. So let me turn it over to her.
Thank you. Mr. President, members of Commission, hello, my name is Atine Hartunian, and I'm the Public Benefits Coordinator. I'm here to give you an update on our From the Source newsletter. As you know, we no longer have it mailed to customers, we have it electronically. And our November issue was the first issue that we emailed to 26,000 customers. The customer list was generated from our eCare database, and so those are customers that pay their bill online or view their bill online and also receive an email letting them know that their bill is ready to be paid. Of the 26,000, 1,000 of those email addresses were collected through our website, through customer service calls, direct sign-ups at community events. We're also continuously reaching out to our customers via Facebook and Twitter. Our customer service reps are asking customers at the end of every call if they'd like to provide us with their email address in order to receive email updates and the source newsletter. We have email sign-ups on our website. Our City Connection newsletter also advertises email sign-ups and directs customers to our website. With the printout of the source newsletter that I provided to you, you also received an report on the number of customers that receive the source, and also the email impact of the source newsletter. This report is generated after a newsletter is sent out, and it shows us how many customers received the newsletter, how many opened it, how many bounced back, number of unsubscriptions, number of times it was open, and what links they clicked on in the newsletter. After reviewing those two documents, do you have any questions that I can answer?
Yeah, so the difference, so the 70%, in other words, 18,000 of the contacts, when you say no info, does that mean that they got it but they didn't open the email?
Actually, I provided an up-to-date list. The original text box was dropped down, and I brought it back up. If you have the newer version, yes, okay. That means the customers opened it, but a lot of times they didn't download the pictures because it gives you the option. You could still read it as text only, and then if you right-click on the images, then you can download it. That shows that customers either some of the images didn't download completely or they didn't download any of the images, but the text was still there. And also, if they didn't click on any HTML links within the newsletter, it doesn't mean they didn't read it. It just means that they just looked at it and closed it. So those 19% actually opened it, either clicked through and chose to download all the
So
images.
really, I mean, if in terms of the number of people who are seeing it, it's really 90% when you add the two categories.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear most of it. I want to know, who are you sending this newsletter to right now?
It's 26,000 customers that had originally signed up through our eCare.
I see.
Those are the customers that view their bills online, also sometimes pay their bills online. And then 1,000 of those email addresses were collected at community events via our website and customer service reps.
Okay, so if, let's say, one of the viewers now would like to submit a name, can that be done just by going to the website?
Yes, if they go to our homepage, GlendaleWaterandPower.com, at the bottom right corner, it says Get Email Updates and sign up for our newsletter. They can enter their email address there, or they can call our customer service line at 548-3300 and ask a customer service rep to sign them up.
Great, thanks.
What additional future plans do you have for this, since you've only gotten one issue out so far?
We're actually going to send out a December issue, and then we go back to our bi-monthly schedule. I think it's good to keep it consistent with our bi-monthly. If you send them a newsletter every month, we're worried that we might kind of clog up their email system, so we don't want to send one every month unless there is a news breaking story or anything like we'd like to send out. It doesn't have to be a form of a newsletter. It could just be an email blast, like a postcard looking type email. We can also use the system to send out postcards as well.
Is this going to replace that, the source?
It already
is.
has.
Okay, I see. Okay, thanks.
When we move to January being the 100% ramp up of billing coming through the smart meter, I would suggest that's something to mention in the source that either brags about it or at least just notifies the cities. I think it's useful. We've had some controversies about the smart meters, and I think that to the extent we can provide, good, succinct, accurate, and positive information to the consumers on how we're using those smart meters, and to help show that it's an efficiency for the whole city. We've had a lot of downsizing of staff, and to me that it shows that we're using our technologies well to get people to pay their bills with this high-tech system, and the system is helping pay for itself, and I think that's an important message for that January issue.
As Mr. Zern said, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, actually, Ms. Dentler, we will have a utility modernization article in every edition.
Yeah.
It's not just January. We'll have something along the very lines that you're talking about in each edition that we put out that talks a little bit more about the benefits, the advantages to the overall grid, all the way down to the advantages to the individual customer. And Atina is
I'm sure you will.
working diligently on that.
I'm sure you will, and I know that you are very well aware of how important a marketing tool this is and public information tool. And with that in mind, I just wanted to move to one comment that's maybe a teeny bit more negative, and that's about page 3 of the source that you printed out for us. And I really applaud you for doing this, and we've all been up here, the commissioners have all been advocating for more use of email and getting ways to get our customers to give us their emails if they're comfortable doing so. So all of those are positives. I just wondered about, sometimes when we don't want to oversell our activities. That's true in my industry. It's true in all industries. We don't want to convey anything that could be regarded as false impression or false information. And I'm not saying that we have, but I'm just wondering, when I read this at home online, I saw paragraph 3 about our water team continually cleaning, relining, and replacing aging pipes. And this to me was maybe a bit of a disconnect with the message that came to council where the council members were hearing so recently about the aging pipes and the need for improvements to the infrastructure. And then in our last meeting that I didn't attend, but when I read the minutes, I saw commissioners were asking, how many miles still have to be repaired and replaced. We really, it just flagged for me that maybe a little bit of a disconnect, because we don't want to tell the community that we're doing things so that they needn't worry about the pipes. We want them to understand the challenges ahead for our infrastructure, so that the community and the council, really understand what we're really dealing with. So I love bragging about all the good work that our employees do. I'm all for that. But I just wanted that, to me, that seems like a little disconnect with some of the information that came to commission and council.
Well, Ms. Dentler, I don't want the community to worry about the pipes either, and they shouldn't. The message I conveyed was we can't afford not to continue to do capital work every year. We have old pipes, we have old lines, we have old sewers, and we continue to replace those. The utility on the water side spent nearly $80 million since 2007. So we've had this down year, this deferred year, which concerns me, because as I think I mentioned to you, I'm big on the infrastructure and keeping it up.
Right.
But the amount of work that they had already started and been doing, a lot of it in more recent times has been the big reservoir water storage work, also very critical. We're going forward to do a little bit more of the conveyance system work, and that's just how you do infrastructure projects, and especially in a diverse operation like water. But part of this serves a dual purpose, and I'll say this again, and I've said it everywhere I can. The workforce in this department is outstanding, and they work very hard. The situation we find ourselves in is not because of the folks who go out there and keep the system running. It has to do with a lot of other issues at the other end of the hierarchy.
Right.
But it's important that I get the message out how well they are doing, and how much work that they are doing, and how concerned they are about our residents and our customers. And so I personally don't think it's not conveying an accurate message.
And I didn't say it was conveying an inaccurate message. I just wanted to bring it up. I worry about overselling how fantastic our infrastructure is when we're also asking people to pay more and help us get more infrastructure done.
No, and you're exactly right. It is something that is never, just the size and scope of it, you will always need to make that investment every single year. I'm just a huge advocate of that. I think I've said before, we can spend $30 to $40 million on the electric side without blinking every single year, and that's what we need to do to maintain the reliability. Mr. Armenian was mentioning with the renewables, but we're very proud of the reliability, and that's something we just don't want to see degraded, both water and electric. But our infrastructure has been well taken care of. It is getting old in many places, and now we focus on the pipes. But a lot of what I wanted to do in this newsletter is to try to educate the residents a little more on exactly what we do. I found this to be true in public works especially, but as I talk to the staff, and this is really coming from the rank and file back to me, is, do people really know what we do, and what we do is important? I go, absolutely, what you do is important, and I'm going to take the effort to make people more aware of that. So it's not my intent to oversell the infrastructure as much as it is to oversell, and I don't think I could ever oversell the workforce enough.
No, I appreciate that. I agree with that.
And I think where Commissioner Dentler is going, and I agree on this, is that the issues that the utility and any utility is facing moving forward are increasingly complex, and there's we kind of have to undo 100 years of where we got to the point of people not worrying about things, saying don't worry about it, just flip the switch, it turns on, open the faucet, the water comes through. I think we have to kind of unravel that a little bit and educate the public, and I think this is a really good mechanism and a channel through which to educate the public on issues that are the challenges that I think any utility faces, whether it's replacing infrastructure, whether it's the integration of renewables. I mean, I think we should, I don't mind, of course, highlighting all the great things that GWP does, because GWP does do a lot of great things, but not also to the exclusion of maybe some element of education in here We can start to bring the public and the customers along with us on this journey of things that we need to do and the trade-offs. You know, we have trade-offs in front of us and choices that we have to make, both as those who manage the utility in the city as well as the customers who are and the residents who have to pay for some of those things. So it will help. It's an investment you make over time so that when we get to conversations about rate increases or having to do this or that to continue the reliability of the utility, we have an we've kind of used this mechanism to educate our customers.
Yep. Absolutely, and we plan as we get a little bit closer to the revenue enhancement issue this coming spring, we will have more articles. But actually, what our goal is probably have a complete and separate outreach campaign that again even outdoes what we accomplished last year as our first year in really doing that, and really focus on that whole educational process and things like the renewables, which a lot of people don't understand. And it seems in some cases, it's good to be green, but what's the
trade-off, right?
Exactly.
And so it being an e-newsletter really gives us a great opportunity where you don't have to sit here and dream up a dissertation on intermittency issues, but you could bring up some basic issues and frame it and link to, let's say, some other article somewhere else that explains what some of these challenges and issues are, to other websites, other articles, and other newspapers, and just kind of highlight it. So I would encourage you, like when things, when those sorts of good articles or things run in other sources, you can kind of use that to frame it in this newsletter, have people link through there and kind of start to educate them.
But that's the drawback. I mean, there's about maybe a third of our customers are not on this email list. So how are those customers getting the message if they're not getting the emails?
Well, that's what we're working hard to get more emails added to this list and constantly marketing the fact that the newsletter is no longer being mailed and that we are moving on to this version, and that we encourage customers to sign up. And if they don't, then soon they'll start seeing that it's not appearing in their mailboxes, and we're hoping that they do call and that they do inquire, and then we give them the opportunity to sign up.
But is there an alternative if they don't have an email? I mean, people don't use, not 100% of them. I mean, most people do, but what's the alternative for them?
What we're trying to do, Mr. Yao, is use other venues in those particular cases. So if it means more frequent updating of our website, our general website, which is accessible to anybody that has a computer, and having features on that website that are regular updates. Also, we're going to start using some of our GTV6 resources a little bit more aggressively to get the message out on these various programs that we have, whether it is utility modernization or the revenue enhancement is just two examples, but also maybe just general education on. Again, I keep going back because I think it was an excellent point Mr. Armenian made about the renewables. I just think that folks don't quite understand the complexities involved in that, and you need to do a better job of getting the word out. So any venue that we can use, it'd be great if we could get 100% of our customer base on the Source newsletter. And we can even use the website to promote the Source and say, call us back or indicate on our website that you'd like to get this. So we'll continue to use every option available to us to get the word out on the various programs we have and use it as an educational tool.
But do you have any research that shows you what our customers are looking at, whether they do it online or they use the bill or bill inserts or inserts a better way?
We actually do have a customer satisfaction survey coming up of our customers, and those are the exact questions we're asking them, if they're aware that the Source is no longer available, and if they will sign up, and how they prefer to get their information. That's a continuous survey that we do every year with our customers, and that does frame kind of how our outreach is done as well.
Great.
I think one of the challenges is obviously there's still a demographic out there that is not online, so they're might not even have email, may not even have internet access. So I think not losing that audience as well is something that we have to consider. I know we all think it's pervasive, but there are parts of the population where technology does not touch them in that way. So I'm encouraged that if there are ways to use Channel 6 or even the types of outreach that you do specifically around some of the key issues like rates, maybe there can be some ongoing types of efforts like that kind of get GWP more visible amongst those populations as well.
And on the limited English speaker or non-English speaking television, as we move towards the revenue enhancement drive, I think it's really going to be critical to not just depend on English speakers who read email. So, I'm sorry,
This is just about electronic newsletter. So with that, I know that we get the water quality report. Are those going to be electronic as well, or is that part of the source forward? Some water quality reports?
The water quality report is something that we're actually required to put out, so I'll have to go back and check exactly if my sense is that has to go out to every water rate-paying customer. So unless we have every single rate-paying customer has an email account, which they don't, we'll be continuing to mail that is what I believe. So.
But yeah, I wasn't sure that was part of the source thing. Okay.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next agenda item.
Can we stay on new business for a second? I think one question I had was about new business rather than agenda forecasts. Sorry. I was interested that in the past couple of weeks, the Glendale News Press had front page headlined articles about things that were within the GWP purview, different topics. That happened the other day that there was a whole front page article about the chromium-6 treatment. And so one thing that's sometimes, it's sometimes startling for me as a commissioner to, in between our meetings, to have kind of controversies or big articles come out in the news press having to do with water and power that haven't come on our agenda, or that we haven't gotten even like an email from staff. And again, not to overburden staff, but I think we would do our jobs more effectively if there could be a way to clue us in that something that's going to be in the public purview and that staff is making comments about in the newspaper, that if it's not going to be on our agenda. For instance, Chrome 6 isn't on our agenda, but there was quite a big announcement about it to the community.
It was a council agenda item on an ongoing grant, and that was picked up by the news press. I believe most of the other articles were related to the charter amendment and the ongoing discussions, which I'm hoping to get Mr. Elliott here. We'll talk about that next. But if you'd like, we could certainly give you a Chrome 6 update. I think
I'm not asking for one because I was informed by the article, and I know I could always email you or staff. But I'm just talking about process-wise, because I couldn't tell that article was only written because of an agenda item at council. So I thought, we'll have a commission meeting soon, and if there are members of the public who want to address us on this big subject that was just written up in the newspaper, they might be here today. And I realized, it's not even on our agenda. So some things go straight to council as an agenda item having to do with water or power that don't come through us. So just so I can understand the process, the Chrome 6 agenda item, that got on the council's agenda without having been on our November agenda.
Correct.
And that's why.
In this particular case, it's because the grant monies came in between, and we had to act pretty quickly. And
so it's a timing question.
It is, and I guess part of it is also some of the items. I'm still trying to get a feel for. And give a Chrome 6 update, but the complexity of the requests, which all required council approval, were like just contracts and documents and things like that. I think for you, I don't know how you feel. I certainly won't speak for you. If I got staff to come in and give you an update on the Chrome 6 efforts, maybe even break down the budgets and where we're at, because the big question, and that's really what was in the paper, is where are we at? And this thing has taken so long, and there's really no, the State Department of Public Health hasn't come up with the defined limits yet that would then put us out of the test mode or the analysis mode and into the actual production mode. So I think, in my opinion, I don't know how you feel, it would be better, I think, if we were able to come and give you a more broad update on the Chrome 6. I don't see it on here, and I think it's a really good point because it's an important project that we've made huge progress on.
So just from a principle perspective, I mean, the way the system is set up is that obviously you can go to, council, and council can do whatever it wants. It's the ultimate body. But the premise of having a commission is to kind of take the burden a little bit off of council in the sense of we can spend more time diving in deeper, whereas they have a bigger plate of issues that they have to deal with. So hopefully, we can have an opportunity as a commission to go back and forth with staff on important issues. Now, sometimes the timing doesn't work out, and I grant you that. But my request would be that on all important issues, to the degree possible, that we have an opportunity as a commission to study and weigh in so that council can have the benefit or the comfort, I guess, that their commission has looked at some of these matters.
And so that we could make a motion if we wanted to recommend something to council. We might from time to time want to make motions, and that's up to us to come up with motions. So absolutely no criticism of staff, and we're all feeling our way through, and you're settling into your new job. I just wanted to mention that as a process point, that sometimes it is awkward to see major topics concerning power and water come into the newspaper, or for me to see them at home when I'm watching city council and think, gosh, did I miss a meeting, or did we not even get an email about that? So not everything has to be a staff report to the commission and agendized. We have a very complicated agenda and forecasting process, so I'm not asking for a report for everything. But I guess I'm also wondering, wouldn't there be times when it might be helpful to just shoot the commissioners an email saying, tonight at council, they're going to be discussing, potentially debating and hearing public comment on topic X, which we didn't have time to bring to you, just so we're aware that it's coming to council.
I want to mention something. I've been on the commission for, I think, over 3 years, and I know from time to time we would request that, but what we do see is that every time there's a council meeting, there's an agenda that is sent out to all of us. And so I know what I do is I usually click on it and I look at all of the topics. And in the past, I have inquired with Glenn, and whenever I saw that there was a topic of interest. So I know I see that. What you're suggesting is actually there. Have you never clicked on that link to see what goes to council?
Of course, yeah, I do sometimes. But I haven't thought that it's really my, now I will take that to heart and do that more proactively. Sometimes I'll just see what's in the paper the next day after council and realize, gosh, this is a topic actually concerning water or power that none of us ever talked about at the commission level. And if it's a matter of timing and there's just too little turnaround time to let us know that something's coming on the agenda, that's understandable. But I will start doing that, and then, if I see that it's on the agenda and I have a question about it, I will send an email to the staff.
Again, though, if it's the consensus of the commission, I can send you an email saying these 3 things are on the agenda, and we should know that firmly by at least no later than the Friday before.
But I think if it's a matter of just notifying that there are things on the agenda, that's what I think it's Tanya's.
Right, we get that.
That's what that email is.
Okay.
I think, though, this is kind of one step further than that, in that, again, I think goes back to my issue that I brought up, which is, to the degree possible, I think it'd be great if we have an opportunity to review at least major items, not every single contract that's coming through, but some of the major items, both these issues that were discussed in this article, for example, are major issues that I think would be good to have had a discussion here. So some of it's a timing issue.
Some of it's a directions issue.
It's just kind of having the sensitivity of that desire by the commission, as well as the role of the commission, in my opinion, which is, to the extent possible, to have an opportunity to chime in, study, review, make recommendations, before council sees it and has to review it. In the case that, we want to, and, we haven't done as much of this as perhaps we should be doing, which is actually to take positions and make recommendations so that council, if a member of the city council would turn around and say, what does the GWP Commission think about this?
Right.
What's the answer going to be each time? It's either we studied it, they didn't have a position, or if the answer majority of the time is, hey, we didn't even review it with the commission, then I think that raises a question in my mind of what is the role of the commission and kind of how are we proceeding on these major items. Again, not that every single GWP management item has to come through commission. I don't think that's the intent of the commission either.
But of course, you can't always tell in advance that a small matter on the council's agenda or a small contract is going to happen to be picked up by a media outlet. And so, I don't expect you to have a crystal ball. And I do think it's handy to have those links to get us to the council agenda. But, well, enough said. I agree with the chairman, the president.
Okay. So let's move on to the next agenda item.
6, agenda forecast.
So we've got a pretty full agenda here that I think we need to revisit. But before we do that, there are two things that we already discussed that I would like to personally propose that we do agendize. We can talk about the timing in a second. One is the charter ballot language in terms of the GWP transfer, and the two is the Chromium 6 that we just discussed. I guess we can take it one at a time.
Are there other commissioners?
Yeah.
First,
So
with respect
first
to the
one,
transfer.
the charter ballot initiative language.
Well, let me go through what we have on here, and I think we can clean a few things out and make room for those too, and we'd be happy to do that.
Well, let's first see if the commissioners want it, and then we can find the room for
Oh,
it.
yeah, definitely. I would agree with the charter amendment ballot update.
Is that properly in our purview?
I think that you could certainly get an update on what's going to be on the ballot. I don't know about a vote. I don't think that would be within your purview. It's already been decided.
Yeah.
It's already been.
An update's
Yeah,
fine.
no, it's more of an update.
Okay.
And then my second thing is the Chromium 6 update.
I would prefer an update to that, but depending on the project schedule, because I understand from the article that it's closing to wrapping it up. So I'd rather have a wrap-up meeting instead of having a progress meeting, then another wrap-up meeting. So it just depends on the schedule.
I'm fine.
When is the project expected to
It'll probably be a few months. I mean, we were looking at having a report at the end of the year, but I think we've got a little bit more time. This is probably something that'll end up stretching out. So if you want to wait several months,
But
otherwise.
I'd like to propose it and get a second, then we can decide where the timing falls in.
I want one more piece of info before I decide that in my mind. Is it coming back to council on an agenda item in the next couple months?
No, I doubt it, Ms. Dentler. We pretty much said to council that was the last time we'd go back for any of the grant money requests because we anticipated this would take us through to the end.
Did you have, was there a lot of public comment or any public comment that night?
There
Okay.
was a comment by a council member.
Okay.
A question by more than one council member, actually, but not a comment. They asked me a question. And
But not public coming forward that particular night? So
Calling a public
we
speaker.
wouldn't necessarily anticipate members of the public wanting to address us as an interim. So I'm comfortable with putting it off for a few months.
Are you interested in
So
seeing-
first we have to see,
Yes, I would
is there a
be
second to see it, and
Sounds
then
like
we can talk
three
about the
people
timing?
that are interested at some point in hearing it, if I'm hearing right.
Yes.
Yes?
Okay.
Okay.
All right, so now we can talk about the timing. And let's go through this list on January 7th list that we have, and then we can talk about the additional two items.
Okay. So on that first one, possible impacts on deferred projects, that's going to be more beneficial as we push that back. I mean, I can tell you right now, there isn't any impacts immediately, and now that we've been successful on the water bond, we should bridge that gap. It'd be a little premature to talk about impacts on deferred maintenance because we are still current. So I think
So do you have a recommendation in terms of where you might want to push it back
I'd push
to?
that back closer to when we get around to budget adoption, so maybe around May. Although we'll see. I think May would be good.
Sure.
Okay.
The second one on utility bill redesign, we're just not ready to come back to you yet with that. I don't have a proposed date. We wanted to try to merge that along with the revenue enhancement so that those two would come together sometime next fiscal year. But I certainly won't wait that long to bring it back to you. So I'd say if you gave us probably a 2 to 3 months on that, we can come back with something that has a little bit more.
Should we put that in April, since there's nothing there?
That's fine. That's fine.
If you happen to make progress quicker, we can always move it up in one of the subsequent meetings.
And then the rest we can leave on there. Mr. Linz will have his coal contracts update. Ramon will have a water update for you. We hope to have the energy risk management presentation. Everything is looking good. I'm going to leave that on there. If there's any change in that, I'll send you all a note. But it looks good for us to bring that to you. I will tell you, that is a little bit of an involved item. It's going to take some time. So if you're thinking about that in relation to some of the other items on there.
You know, that's the one I was especially interested in for the last 6 months to a year, and I won't be here for the January meeting. Can we push that back then?
That actually would work great for us. So if we want to push that into February, we could do that. In fact, we'll probably have a little bit better handle on it by
That's
then.
fine with me, if other commissioners agree.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. And so
The only caveat to that, and I know you won't be here, is we have a council calendar. So if we're pushing that to get to council sooner, then I'll want to bring it back to you sooner, obviously, based on some comments you just made. So at least where we can.
But do you know that right now, or are you?
I don't know that immediately, but I will. So we'll tentatively put it in February. But if that date ends up comes under
Sooner,
conflict
then let's
with a
move it-
council date,
let's move it back up.
Sure, we want it. That's already planned in our schedule to bring it to you prior to council.
Okay.
What would council need to know about the energy risk management?
They have to approve it.
But this one says hedging versus spot market.
That's just one aspect of
Okay.
it. The whole policy has been overhauled by staff and is going to council for approval.
I would think that, Commissioner Ajamian would be interested in hearing that. Do we know for sure that he's...
Oh, I don't know.
We don't know, so... So let's...
So for now, we're deferring it to February, right?
February.
If something comes up on that it's going to move quicker in council, then you'll propose to move it back up.
That's correct, and I'll send you all a note on that. Ramon indicated that the NERC WEC, he really doesn't have anything in January. We could easily move that to February as well.
Okay.
So that frees up another slot, and then we can I can have Mr. Elliott come and
Charter.
and possibly the city attorney too, to give you an overview of what's
The
been
charter
approved by
ballot
council.
initiative. Okay, that'd be
Absolutely.
great.
The NERC WEC is also on for March. I think it was a quarterly update at some
Yeah.
point, so maybe we just take it off February and put it in March.
In some of these, Mr. President, members of the commission, we've been giving these fairly frequent or regular updates, and as I've looked at them, I'm not sure that that's value added for you. So if we might be able to put some of these into a different scheduling category.
Okay. I mean, I would be in agreement just taking it off, because you've got one coming up in March.
And then when would you like Chrome 6? Maybe middle of the year? I'll tell you what, why don't we tentatively put it in for
Let's just put it somewhere later
April?
down. Yeah.
And then depending on progress made,
Exactly.
I'll
Exactly.
update you.
Okay. All right. So what we're looking at, just to recap, we're looking at the ballot initiative, right? The ballot language. We're looking at the Water Services Division update, correct?
We can do that.
We're looking at the coal contracts, and that's it, right?
How about the utility modernization update?
Oh, yeah.
Well, we just did that today.
Yeah, is there anything that...
There won't-
You seem to have it every month.
Yeah.
Is that
Yes.
the intention?
That was the...
Well, we used to call it Smart Grid Update. Now
Previously.
it's Utility Modernization
Okay.
Update.
So that was one particularly I was talking about that we may move
Yeah,
to
so
more
I
of a
think if there's nothing,
quarterly.
we can kill that.
Bi-monthly or something?
Yeah.
Okay.
But I think between the coal contracts and the charter presentation with questions, I think
Yeah.
that'll be a pretty
Yeah.
decent meeting.
I agree. Okay. Any other agenda items that anyone else wants to add?
The other thing was the budget. Mr. Zone, you mentioned that the budget might not come back to us until May. Isn't there a way we can get it sooner so that we can evaluate or maybe make suggestions on the final budget proposal?
Well, no, Mr. Yao indicated, I called it budget season, sometime before June 30th, and I just picked May to put the one item on there. But the actual budget presentation would probably likely be more in that April area. Sometime once we have an idea of when our presentation and what we're presenting to council is, and by that I mean what they want us to present to them, then we'll tailor that for the commission and get ahead of you, get it to you ahead of time before that date. So I'm guessing that's probably more the April time frame.
Maybe
Last year we did bring it to you. I thought we brought it to you in May. I wasn't here. I thought it was brought to you in May, as I recall. And it was done, I think, just because of timing. Again, it was like the day before or the week before the study session occurred. So it just happened to be the time.
Should we put something just as a marker here somewhere?
And April's.
So let's put that on April
Sure.
for now, and we can always review it later. And I believe also in April, three positions on the commission will be up for reappointment based on election results in city council, for whatever that's worth. Okay, any other items?
I'll move to adjourn.
Second? All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. We're adjourned.